The unknown threat. The universe is vast, stretching out farther than any mind can comprehend. Stars, planets, and strange worlds fill the endless void. But in one corner of this universe, on a small planet called Earth, something extraordinary was happening. No one on Earth knew it yet, but the fate of their world was about to change forever. It all began with a signal. A strange, low-frequency transmission that reached alien ears, traveling across the stars. It wasn't a message of peace or war, but just a sign that Earth existed. To the aliens, it was an invitation to investigate. They had explored many worlds before, but Earth was different. Their sensors could pick up odd energy patterns coming from this tiny blue planet, things they had never seen anywhere else. The aliens were known as the Zogiths, a powerful and technologically advanced species. They had conquered many star systems and thrived on the resources of distant worlds. But Earth was not like the others. The Zogiths were curious, but they had no idea what awaited them. In the heart of their massive fleet, aboard the flagship cruiser Zorthar, Commander Varrock stared at the holographic image of Earth on his ship's control panel. The planet looked peaceful, beautiful even. From a distance, Earth appeared like any other world. But Varrock was cautious. He knew the dangers of underestimating an unknown species. He gave the command, and the fleet of Zogith warships began their journey toward Earth. As the ships traveled, something strange occurred. The signals Earth had been sending suddenly stopped. The Zogiths had expected this, thinking it was just a technical glitch or some form of natural interference. But they couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The silence was unsettling. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the world continued its daily life. People went to work, children went to school, and the planet seemed like it always had. But high above them, in the cold void of space, things were far from ordinary. Far away in a hidden military facility, humanity had been working in secret for years. No one knew the full scale of it, not even the governments of the world. But a select group of scientists and engineers had been building something that could change the course of history. They called it the Leviathan. The Leviathan was humanity's ultimate weapon, a machine of unimaginable power. It was a massive warship, but not just any warship. It was a weapon capable of destroying entire fleets, designed to protect Earth from any threat, especially from beyond the stars. But until now, it had never been tested in real combat. In fact, no one had ever seen it fully activated. Its existence was a closely guarded secret, known only to a few top leaders and scientists. For years, Earth's leaders had prepared for the possibility of an alien invasion, building the Leviathan in the depths of a forgotten mountain. The ship was designed to be unstoppable, a fortress in space. It could withstand attacks from powerful enemies and had weapons capable of obliterating anything in its path. But there was one thing no one could predict. How would it perform when the time came to use it? As the Zogith fleet neared Earth, Commander Varrock's unease grew. He had seen many worlds, but something about this mission felt different. His crew had detected something unusual, an energy reading that they couldn't explain. It was coming from the planet below. "What is that?" Varrock asked, pointing at the display showing the strange energy wave. It was unlike anything his people had encountered. "Sir, it's growing," replied his chief science officer, Vera. "The energy is getting stronger." Varrock's instincts told him that something was wrong. He wasn't sure what it was, but he could feel it deep in his gut. Something was waiting for them on Earth, something they weren't ready for. At that exact moment, the skies over Earth darkened. The Zogith fleet entered the planet's atmosphere, their ships descending toward the surface. But the moment they did, the signal stopped. Silence. Everything went dark. Then it happened. From deep within the Earth, something began to stir. High in the mountains, deep underground, the Leviathan powered up for the first time. Hidden from the eyes of the world, the massive war machine began to hum, sending ripples of energy into the atmosphere. The Zogith ship's systems began to malfunction. The alien fleet struggled to regain control of their navigation. "Alert! Our systems are going offline," shouted Vera as alarms blared across the Zogoth flagship. "Get it back online now," Varrock ordered, but it was too late. The alien fleet was disoriented, unable to understand what was happening. From the Earth's surface, the Leviathan emerged. It was an enormous warship, so large it covered the sky as it ascended. Its sleek, dark exterior reflected the distant light of the sun as it powered its engines and began to ascend into the atmosphere. The world had no idea what was coming, but the Zogoths did. They had expected Earth to be easy to conquer. They had expected weak defenses, no real resistance. But now, as their ships faltered and their sensors failed, they realized that Earth was not the peaceful planet they thought it was. The aliens had encountered something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. And so, the first contact between humans and aliens began. But it wasn't a simple meeting of two civilizations. It was the beginning of a battle that would determine the future of both worlds. The Zogoths would soon learn that humanity was not to be underestimated. The unknown threat was only beginning. Preparing for the unknown. The Zogoths had underestimated Earth, and now they would pay the price. Commander Varrock stared at the chaos unfolding around him, his mind racing. His fleet was in disarray, their ships disabled by an unknown force coming from the surface. His flagship, Zorthar, was still operational, but its sensors were useless, and communication with the other ships was lost. "Prepare for the worst," Varrock muttered under his breath, gripping the armrests of his command chair. He had led his people through countless conquests, but he had never felt so unprepared. This planet, Earth, had turned from a potential conquest into an unpredictable nightmare. While the Zogoths struggled to regain control, deep beneath the Earth's surface, humanity's greatest secret was about to be fully revealed. The Leviathan, a war machine like no other, powered up fully for the first time. Its creators had never expected it to face a real battle, but now, with the alien fleet threatening Earth's existence, it had no choice but to rise. The Leviathan's massive engines hummed as it ascended into the sky, its silhouette casting a shadow across the land below. The ship, shaped like a colossal beast, moved silently despite its size, its hull reflecting the light of the sun as it rose higher and higher into the atmosphere. It was a technological marvel, a weapon designed not just for war, but for humanity's survival. Within the Leviathan's command center, General Marcus Hale, the human leader overseeing the defense, stood with his team. He had spent years overseeing the project, but even he couldn't hide the growing tension in his voice. "Status report," General Hale barked, his eyes fixed on the massive monitors in front of him. "Everything's operational, sir," came the response from his tech officer. "Weapons systems, shields, engines, all systems are green." But Hale wasn't reassured. The Leviathan had never been tested. They had run simulations, sure, but simulations weren't real. He knew the world's future depended on this machine. "Are we ready for battle?" Hale asked, his voice steady despite the storm of anxiety inside him. "We are, General," said the officer. "But the enemy? We don't know how powerful they are yet." Hale nodded grimly. The Zogoths were powerful, no doubt, and their technology was far beyond what humanity had ever seen. But humanity had something that the Zogoths didn't, a fierce will to survive. And Hale knew that the moment the battle began, the Zogoths would learn just how determined humanity was. Back on the surface, cities around the world were in chaos. People stared up at the sky, watching as the Leviathan rose higher. No one knew what was happening. News channels scrambled to report the strange phenomenon, and government agencies tried to make sense of the situation. But no one truly understood the gravity of the moment. And the aliens? They were about to face humanity's true power. In the Zogoth fleet, panic began to spread. Communications were still down, and their ships struggled to regain full control. Commander Varrock cursed under his breath as he watched the Earth's atmosphere shimmer with strange energy. His fleet, which had been so sure of victory, was now disoriented and confused. "We need to regroup," Varrock said, his voice tight. "Prepare for combat. The Earthlings have something we don't understand, but we'll crush them before they have a chance to strike." But even as Varrock gave the order to prepare for battle, he couldn't shake the feeling that things weren't going to go as planned. Earth was no ordinary planet, and the humans were no ordinary species. As the Zoggoths readied themselves, General Hale's voice came through the Leviathan speakers, calm and determined. "All forces, prepare for engagement. This is humanity's last stand. We will not go down without a fight." The crew responded with an almost eerie synchronization, everyone working together without hesitation. The Leviathan's massive weapons powered up, ready to unleash destruction upon the alien invaders. The humans knew they were facing an unknown enemy, but their determination was stronger than any fear. The Zoggoth fleet had no idea what was coming, but the first strike would not come from the Leviathan. Instead, it would come from something much smaller, much more unexpected. A fleet of human fighter jets, piloted by the bravest men and women from around the world, launched into the sky, racing toward the alien ships. They were the first line of defense, the vanguard of humanity's resistance. Commander Varrock watched in disbelief as the jets flew toward his fleet, their weapons blazing. "They're attacking already," Varrock gasped. "They're insane." Vyra, his science officer, said, her voice filled with awe. "These humans, they're not afraid." The alien fleet was powerful, but they had never seen an enemy like this. The humans were fighting with everything they had. Their determination to protect their world, their homes, their families, was unlike anything the Zoggoths had ever experienced. The fighter jets were no match for the alien warships, but they didn't need to be. They were simply buying time, and time was exactly what the Leviathan needed. Far below, Hale watched as the jets engaged the enemy. "Hold strong," he whispered to himself. "We've come too far to fail now." As the first shots were exchanged, the stage was set. Humanity's ultimate weapon, the Leviathan, was ready to face the unknown threat. The battle for Earth had begun. The aliens had come seeking conquest, but they were about to learn that Earth was not a world to be taken lightly. This was humanity's moment to prove that no force in the universe could ever break them. No matter how powerful the enemy, humanity would always rise. The first encounter. The tension in the skies over Earth was thick. For the first time, humanity stood face to face with an alien threat that had the power to wipe out entire worlds. But Earth was not going down without a fight. The Zoggoth fleet, hovering over the planet, was still disoriented from the strange energy fields coming from the surface. Commander Varrock, though shaken, rallied his forces. His mind raced as he scanned the horizon. He had never seen anything like this before. Humanity's response to invasion was more organized, more determined, and more dangerous than he had expected. "Maintain formation," Varrock barked, his voice sharp and commanding. The alien fleet responded immediately, their warships slowly aligning, preparing for the confrontation they knew was inevitable. At that very moment, far below, the Leviathan began to move. Its massive engines hummed to life, and the enormous warship soared into the atmosphere with a roar that shook the air. The surface of Earth seemed to tremble as the Leviathan ascended higher, its massive frame now fully visible against the sky. The alien fleet had never seen anything like it, and for the first time, Varrock felt a flicker of doubt. This was not just a weapon of war. This was something that spoke to the very heart of humanity's determination. Inside the Leviathan's command center, General Hale stood silently, watching the holographic display of Earth and the alien fleet. His face was tense, but his eyes never wavered. He was a leader, not just of the soldiers aboard the Leviathan, but of every person on Earth who had put their faith in him. His hands rested firmly on the console in front of him. "Target locked, General," came the voice of Lieutenant Sarah Doyle, his weapons officer. The alien fleet is in range. Are we ready? Hale took a deep breath. He had never felt this kind of pressure. For years, he had prepared for this moment. But now that it had arrived, there was no turning back. "Fire when ready," he ordered quietly. The Leviathan responded, as if it had been waiting for this moment all its life. It unleashed a volley of energy blasts from its massive cannons, powerful beams of light that cut through the atmosphere like knives. The first shot hit one of the smaller Zogoth ships, and in an instant, the ship disintegrated into a ball of fire and debris. The sheer power of the weapon was enough to send shockwaves through the alien fleet, the force of the explosion shaking their ships and causing a ripple of panic to spread across their ranks. Varrock watched in disbelief as his ship's sensors went wild. "What just happened?" he demanded, his voice rising in shock. "Sir, one of our ships has been destroyed. We're under attack." Vira, his chief science officer, shouted. Varrock's mind raced. This was not just a defense. This was an all-out assault. The humans were ready for war, and their weapon was terrifyingly effective. In a panic, Varrock ordered his fleet to return fire. The Zogoth ships powered up their own weapons, and beams of red energy shot toward the Leviathan. But they were too slow. The Leviathan's shields flared to life, absorbing the incoming fire with ease. The Zogoth weapons, though powerful, were nothing compared to the Leviathan's superior defense systems. "Shield holding," Lieutenant Doyle reported calmly. "They're not getting through." The alien fleet began to regroup, but it was clear they were outmatched. The Zogoth ships, despite their advanced technology, were no match for the Leviathan's overwhelming firepower. The humans, who had once been considered weak and primitive, were showing the Zogoths that their greatest strength was not in the size of their weapons, but in their will to survive. As the Leviathan fired again, another Zogoth warship was torn apart in a brilliant explosion. The surviving Zogoth ships began to retreat, but the humans weren't finished yet. The Leviathan pursued, its engines roaring with power. But the Zogoths were not completely helpless. Their ships were fast, and though they couldn't match the Leviathan's power, they had one advantage that humanity could not predict: intelligence. The Zogoths weren't willing to simply run away from this fight. They had been in countless battles before, and they knew how to turn the tide in their favor. "Commander Varrock," Vera said, her voice calm despite the chaos. "We've activated the cloaking systems. They won't see us coming." Varrock nodded grimly. The Zogoths had perfected the art of stealth, using advanced cloaking technology that allowed their ships to vanish from view. In the blink of an eye, the fleet disappeared, leaving no trace of their position. But Varrock wasn't satisfied with just disappearing. He knew the humans were clever, and they would not be easily tricked. The Leviathan continued its relentless pursuit, unaware that the Zogoth ships had gone invisible. General Hale's eyes darted across the screens, looking for any sign of the enemy. The Leviathan's radar systems were still scanning, but the cloaking devices were working flawlessly. "Where are they?" Hale muttered to himself, his finger hovering over the command panel. He knew the Zogoths would strike again. It was only a matter of time before they did. Suddenly, a warning blared across the command center. "Incoming fire," the computer called out. The first blast hit the Leviathan's shields with a deafening crack. The ship rocked, and a chorus of alarms filled the air. But the shields held strong, protecting the crew. Hale's heart pounded, but he knew that this was only the beginning. The Zogoths had shown their hand, and now humanity would fight back with everything they had. The first encounter was over, but the war had just begun. Commander Varrock watched as his ships began to reappear, moving in for the next phase of their attack. He had lost 2 ships, but they had learned something crucial. Earth was not a place to be taken lightly. The humans had shown their power, but the Zogoths were far from done. They had a reputation to uphold, and they would do whatever it took to claim this planet as their own. As the Leviathan powered forward, ready for the next strike, the stage was set for a war unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. The humans had proven themselves in battle, but now the question remained: would they survive what was to come? One thing was clear. This was no longer a simple battle for Earth. It was a battle for the survival of everything humanity held dear. The fight begins. The silence between the two armies hung heavy in the air. The Zoggoth fleet, cloaked and reappearing in waves, had begun their offensive once more. Commander Varrock was determined to show that his fleet was not easily beaten, despite the shock of their first encounter with the Leviathan. The human war machine had been a surprise, but Varrock had fought in hundreds of battles across the stars. He knew how to adapt. "Prepare for engagement," he commanded. "Target their shields. We need to take down the Leviathan's defenses before we can even think about attacking the heart of the ship." Varrock's fleet was smaller now, but no less dangerous. The Zoggoth's advantage was in their speed and maneuverability. They moved like shadows through the atmosphere, launching precise bursts of energy fire aimed directly at the Leviathan. With their cloaking systems, they were harder to detect, making them elusive targets. However, the Leviathan had not been caught off guard again. General Hale stood at the helm, calm and unwavering. His eyes never left the screens that displayed the incoming threat. "All hands, brace for impact." Hale's voice echoed across the ship's command deck. He knew this next wave would be different. The Zoggoths had learned from their mistakes. They would be faster, smarter, and more brutal than before. Suddenly, the first volley of energy blasts rained down on the Leviathan. Each strike shook the massive warship, causing the crew to brace themselves. But the shield held, barely. "Shields at 75%, General," Lieutenant Doyle reported, her voice steady, despite the alarms blaring around her. "We can take it," Hale replied, his expression grim. "Hold them off. We're not going down today." But as the battle raged, the Zoggoths revealed their most dangerous weapon yet. A pulse of dark energy surged from one of the larger Zoggoth ships, its power unmistakable. It was a concentrated blast meant to pierce even the strongest of shields, a weapon designed for this very kind of warfare. As the pulse shot out toward the Leviathan, everything seemed to slow down for a moment. The blast hit the Leviathan's shields with a cataclysmic force. The entire ship rattled violently. General Hale could hear the sound of the ship's bones creaking under the pressure. It was a sound he never wanted to hear again. "Shields failing," Lieutenant Doyle shouted. "Brace for impact," Hale ordered. There was a deafening explosion, and for a split second, the Leviathan's crew was thrown into chaos. The ship's outer hull was scorched, blackened by the energy pulse. Emergency lights flickered as the massive warship struggled to stay on course. "Damage report," Hale barked, his voice cutting through the panic. "External shields are down to 40%, but structural integrity is holding," came the response. "We've lost some power to auxiliary systems, but we're still operational." General Hale's heart raced. They had just come dangerously close to losing the battle. If the Zoggoths had a few more of those pulses, the Leviathan might not survive. The enemy was relentless. The Zoggoth ships came again and again, their cloaking devices rendering them nearly invisible in the chaos. The human jets, the bravest pilots in the world, continued to engage the aliens, but they were quickly outmatched. Their weapons barely made a dent in the armored Zoggoth ships, and the fighter jets were becoming fewer with each pass. "We can't hold them off much longer, sir," said Commander Jessica Turner, the leader of the human fighter squadrons. Her voice was steady, but it was clear she knew the stakes. "We need to turn the tide. We need to hit them harder." Hale nodded, his mind already working. The Zoggoths had underestimated humanity, but they weren't foolish. If they were going to win this battle, they needed something more, something the Zoggoths couldn't predict. "Activate the secondary weapon systems," Hale said, his voice cold with determination. The Leviathan had more tricks hidden within its massive hull than anyone had realized. While its primary weapons were powerful enough to decimate fleets, the secondary systems were designed for a different kind of warfare. It wasn't just a warship, It was a fortress capable of taking on entire armies. A deep hum filled the air as the Leviathan's secondary cannons powered up. The massive warship angled itself toward the largest of the Zoggoth ships, its cannons locking onto the target with eerie precision. Firing secondary weapons, came the shout from the weapons officer. The Leviathan's cannons opened fire, unleashing a barrage of energy, blasts far more concentrated than anything the aliens had encountered before. The beams shot through the sky with incredible force, slicing through the Zoggoth warships with ease. One by one, they began to fall, their hulls exploding in brilliant flashes of light. Varrock, watching the destruction unfold, clenched his fists in rage. He had underestimated the humans, and it was starting to show. "This cannot continue," Varrock muttered. "Prepare for Phase 2 of the operation." With a flick of his hand, Varrock activated his fleet's final tactic, a desperate measure. The remaining Zoggoth ships began to converge on the Leviathan, surrounding it on all sides. It was a classic pincer maneuver, designed to overwhelm and overpower. "We're being surrounded," Doyle reported, her voice tight. "They're closing in from every direction." General Hale didn't flinch. He had expected this. The Zoggoths were learning quickly, but the humans had one advantage the Zoggoths hadn't accounted for. They were willing to fight with everything they had. And now, it wasn't just the Leviathan fighting for survival. It was the will of every human who had ever lived, every person who had ever dreamed of a future free from invasion. "Bring them in closer," Hale said, a spark of confidence in his voice. "We've got one last move." The Leviathan's engines roared to life, and with a speed that surprised even the Zoggoths, the warship surged forward. It broke through the ring of Zoggoth ships, its secondary cannons firing with deadly accuracy, cutting down the alien vessels one by one. But it wasn't just about firepower anymore. Humanity's secret weapon wasn't just technology, it was their resolve. The battle had begun in earnest, and it was clear that the Zoggoths were in for a fight unlike anything they had ever experienced. The first phase of humanity's defense had ended. Now, it was time to see if the aliens could adapt fast enough to survive the next wave of the human war machine. The fight for Earth had only just begun, and neither side was willing to back down. Secrets of the Leviathan. The sky above Earth was painted with chaos as the battle between humanity and the Zoggoths raged on. The Zoggoth fleet, although severely weakened, was not easily broken. Commander Varrock knew his forces had to regroup, but something had shifted. The humans' resilience had taken him by surprise, and now his fleet was struggling to regain control. The Leviathan, Earth's ultimate weapon, had proven itself to be a formidable foe. Its weapons were devastating, its speed and power undeniable. Yet, Varrock couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper, something more powerful, lay hidden beneath the Leviathan's surface. The humans were relentless, refusing to let up. The Leviathan's secondary weapons had wiped out nearly a third of his fleet, and Varrock had no intention of losing the remainder of his forces. His ships had been damaged, their cloaking systems disabled, and now they were vulnerable. But the Zoggoths were a race of survivors. They had fought on the edge of the galaxy, and they knew what it meant to fight against the odds. As Varrock's ships repositioned, his mind turned back to the strange energy pulse that had started the whole confrontation. It was unlike anything the Zoggoths had ever encountered before, a strange force emanating from the planet itself. He had assumed it was some form of human technology, but the more he thought about it, the less certain he became. Down below, deep inside the Leviathan, General Hale was facing an entirely different set of problems. The ship's victory over the Zoggoths had been hard-won, but the cost was great. The damage to the Leviathan was extensive. Hull breaches, power fluctuations, and systems failures were all beginning to take their toll. "Status report," Hale ordered, his voice firm as he watched the damage readouts flashing on the holographic display. "Main reactor is holding, but there are critical systems down," Lieutenant Doyle replied. "Shields are at 45%, secondary weapon systems are offline, and we're losing power to the lower decks. Hale's jaw tightened. We can't afford any more hits like that. We need to finish this. But even as he spoke, there was an unease growing in the back of his mind. The Zoggoths were regrouping. They hadn't given up. The battle was far from over. It was then that a low hum filled the Leviathan's hull. At first, it was so faint that no one paid it much attention. But the sound grew louder, vibrating through the ship's metal skeleton. The hum was not like any noise they had heard before. It wasn't mechanical. It was organic, like the sound of something alive. General Hale looked up sharply. "What's happening?" Lieutenant Doyle's hands flew over her console as she scanned for any anomaly. "Sir, there's a fluctuation in the core. It's not a malfunction. It's something else." Hale's eyes narrowed. Something else. Before Doyle could answer, the ship's systems suddenly flared to life. The hum increased in intensity, and the ship itself seemed to pulse with energy. The readings on the console spiked wildly, causing a few sparks to fly from the panel. "Shut it down," Hale shouted. "What's going on?" I don't know," Doyle exclaimed. "This shouldn't be happening." "It's like the ship is." The word hung in the air. Alive. The Leviathan wasn't just a weapon. It wasn't just a war machine. It was something more. It was a creation of unimaginable power, and somehow the ship itself had begun to respond to the energy pulses. It was as if the ship was drawing from the planet's core, tapping into a source of power that went far beyond what they had ever realized. In the dark corridors below deck, the crew felt it too. The air grew heavy, thick with an electric charge. The walls vibrated as if they were alive, resonating with the strange energy. People looked at each other in confusion and fear. The Leviathan had always been powerful, but this was something entirely new. "We're losing control, General," Doyle cried. "The core is destabilizing." But Hale wasn't ready to give up yet. The humans had spent years building the Leviathan, and no matter what the ship had become, he would not let it fall. He reached for the emergency override, determined to regain control before the ship went critical. "Hold it steady," Hale commanded. "Whatever this is, we can still make it work. We need to stay calm." But it was too late. The ship's systems went into overdrive, and the core reached an unprecedented level of power. The Leviathan's weapon systems began to power up, but this time, they were no longer just a response to external threats. The ship's weapons began to fire of their own accord. Beams of destructive energy surged out from the Leviathan, but instead of targeting the Zoggoth fleet, they shot into space in all directions. "This isn't us," Lieutenant Doyle shouted, her hands scrambling to stop the chaos. But it was clear now. The Leviathan was doing something beyond human control. It was as if it had gained a mind of its own. General Hale watched in stunned silence as the ship's outer guns continued to fire, targeting nothing in particular. It wasn't just an offensive strike. It was a call, an invitation to something greater, something no one had expected, something buried deep within the Leviathan's design. "The ship is communicating," Hale murmured. But with who? A sudden, overwhelming realization struck Hale like a thunderbolt. The Leviathan wasn't just an Earth defense weapon. It had been built to protect the planet, yes, but there was something else buried deep within its core, a deep connection to something far older and far more powerful than humanity had ever realized. The Zoggoths had not just been drawn to Earth by the human signals. No, something had been calling them. The energy pulses from Earth were no accident. The Leviathan was not just a weapon. It was a vessel, one that had been created to open a door, to awaken an ancient power that had been dormant beneath the surface of the planet for millennia. The Zoggoths had thought they were fighting humanity's greatest creation. But in truth, they had awakened a force that could reshape the very fabric of the galaxy itself. The stage was set for a new kind of war, one where humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for control of something far greater than any of them could have imagined. And the Zoggoths, despite their might, were about to realize that they had made a grave mistake in underestimating the planet Earth. The true battle had only just begun. Humanity's choice. The Leviathan, now pulsing with unimaginable energy, stood at the center of a conflict far greater than anyone could have predicted. Its weapons, once a mere extension of humanity's military might, were now acting of their own accord, as if guided by some ancient force deep within the planet itself. The hum that filled the Leviathan's hull was no longer a warning. It was a symphony, a call to something older, something vast, something that neither the Zogoths nor humanity had understood until now. General Hale stood at the helm, his hands clenched tightly around the console. His mind was racing, torn between disbelief and the urgent need to act. He had spent years preparing for this moment, the moment when humanity would stand against an alien threat, but nothing in his training or experience could have prepared him for what was unfolding before him now. General. Lieutenant Doyle's voice cut through the haze of uncertainty. The Zogoth fleet is closing in. They're preparing to launch a full-scale assault, but I don't think they realize what's happening with the Leviathan. It's not responding to our commands anymore. Hale's eyes flicked to the holographic display, where the Zogoth ships continued to circle the Leviathan. They had regrouped after the initial onslaught, and now they seemed more coordinated, more determined than ever. The retreat they had once attempted was no longer in their plans. They were coming to finish what they had started. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and with it came the question that weighed heavily on Hale's mind. What would humanity do when it had the power to not just defend itself, but to conquer? The Zogoths had no idea what they were up against. Their ships, though formidable, were now at the mercy of a force they couldn't comprehend. The Leviathan was no longer a simple warship. It was the gateway to something ancient and powerful. Its weapon systems were alive, responding to the world's most primal need: survival. As the Zogoth fleet launched their first barrage of missiles, Hale felt his heart rate spike. This was it, the moment where the fate of Earth, and potentially the galaxy, hung in the balance. But in that instant, something unexpected happened. The Leviathan's core pulsed, and the energy field surrounding it expanded like an invisible force, absorbing the incoming missiles before they could reach the ship. It wasn't just a defense mechanism. It was a shield, a barrier that stretched beyond the ship's exterior, creating a massive dome of energy that encased the battlefield. What is this? Lieutenant Doyle gasped, eyes wide with disbelief. The Leviathan. It's expanding its power. The entire battlefield is in its grasp. Hale watched in awe as the energy barrier pushed outward, pushing the Zogoth ships away, like a cosmic wave crashing through a fleet of stones. For the first time, the Zogoths saw the Leviathan not as an enemy, but as a force of nature, one that they couldn't contain. "This is no ordinary weapon," Varrock muttered, his eyes glued to the display on his flagship. His fleet was being pushed back by the energy dome, their weapons unable to breach its force. What are we up against? The Zogoths had been trained for war, but the presence of the Leviathan, this living, breathing machine, was beyond anything their minds could fathom. As their ships struggled against the force field, Varrock realized the cold truth. They were no longer fighting for control of Earth. They were fighting for survival. "Commander," Vera said, her voice shaking, "we've made a terrible mistake. The humans, they weren't just defending their planet. This isn't just a warship. It's a beacon, a signal, a call." Varrock turned sharply, his heart racing. A call? A call to what? Vira's eyes widened in fear. "A call to the old ones, Commander. The ones who created the Leviathan. The ones who left behind the power buried within this planet." Varrock stood in stunned silence. The realization hit him like a tidal wave. The Zogoths had not just encountered a powerful weapon. They had unearthed a force from another age, a force that had the potential to reshape the galaxy itself. This was not just a battle for Earth. This was a battle for something much larger, something the Zogoths could never hope to control. Meanwhile, on Earth's surface, The situation was growing dire. The Zoggoths, although struggling in space, were not giving up. They were preparing for one final, desperate assault, a full-on attack with everything they had left. But humanity was now faced with a question that would define their future. Should they use the Leviathan's untapped power to obliterate the Zoggoth fleet and ensure their survival? Or should they take a step back, knowing that the very force they had awakened could endanger the galaxy itself? General Hale stood in the command center, his heart torn. The Leviathan's power was unlike anything he had ever seen. It could wipe out the Zoggoths in an instant, erase their entire fleet, and secure Earth's future. But in doing so, they might trigger something far worse, something that could have consequences beyond their understanding. "General, we need to decide," Lieutenant Doyle urged, her voice strained. "If we unleash the full power of the Leviathan now, we'll end this fight. But we might lose control of it. This power doesn't belong to us. It was never meant to be used like this." Hale closed his eyes for a moment, his mind racing. He thought about his family, about the people on Earth, about the innocent lives that hung in the balance. The choice was clear. They could fight for peace, or they could fight for domination. "Do we have a choice?" Hale asked, his voice tight with uncertainty. But the question was answered by a voice that no one expected. "We always have a choice." The voice came from the ship's AI system, but this wasn't just a programmed response. It was the Leviathan speaking, or rather, something inside it had begun to speak. "What do you mean?" Hale asked, stunned. "The power you seek," the AI responded, "is not yours to control. It was never meant to be used by your people. You have awakened something ancient, something that belongs to the galaxy, not to Earth." Hale's heart raced. "Then what are we supposed to do?" The AI was silent for a moment. "The choice is yours, General. Will you use this power to destroy, or will you use it to protect?" The Zoggoths were closing in. The time to decide had come. With the fate of Earth and the galaxy at stake, Hale had to make the most difficult decision of his life. Would humanity give in to the power they had discovered, or would they risk everything to protect the future from forces beyond their control? The ultimate choice had come, to fight or to be free. The aftermath. The battlefield was a twisted landscape of light and fire, as the Leviathan and the Zoggoth fleet clashed in the cold expanse of space. General Hale stood in the heart of his ship's command center, the weight of the decision he had made settling heavily on his shoulders. The battle had reached its peak. Now it was time for humanity to choose its path, to decide what kind of future it would create. "General," Lieutenant Doyle's voice cut through the tension, her words carrying a sense of urgency. "The Zoggoths are retreating. But there's something else." Hale turned, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What do you mean, something else?" Doyle pointed to the holographic map in front of them. The Zoggoth fleet had pulled back, but something was happening. An energy pulse, similar to the one that had initially triggered the battle, was coming from deep within the Leviathan. It was no longer just a weapon. It was a force of nature, a force that was stirring. "The Leviathan's power," Doyle said, her voice trembling. "It's growing beyond our control. If we don't stop it soon, it could destroy the entire planet." Hale's stomach dropped. The choice he had made to harness the Leviathan's power had given Earth the chance to survive, but it had come at a price. The energy that had once been a simple tool of war had transformed into something far more dangerous. The ancient force buried within the ship was waking up, and it was no longer just humanity's to command. The Leviathan was responding to something far older, far more powerful, something that had been dormant for millennia. "We have to stop it," Hale said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "If the Leviathan's power goes unchecked, it won't just destroy the Zoggoths. It'll destroy us all." But as the crew scrambled to contain the energy surge, something unexpected happened. The voice of the Leviathan, once a passive observer, spoke again, not through the AI, but in a way that was far more direct. "You do not need to fear me, General," the voice echoed through the command center. It was neither mechanical nor human. It was the voice of the Leviathan itself, ancient and powerful, reverberating with the weight of forgotten eras. I was never meant to destroy. I was created to protect. Hale stood frozen, his breath catching in his throat. Protect? From what? The Leviathan's voice was patient, almost sorrowful. The Zoggoths were not the only invaders. They are merely one of many who seek to exploit your world. The power within me is not just a weapon. It is a key to a force that transcends all. I was meant to be the last line of defense, not just for your planet, but for all life in this galaxy. The crew looked around in stunned silence. The truth was unfolding before them, and it was far beyond anything they had ever expected. The Leviathan wasn't just a tool. It was a guardian, an ancient creation, built to preserve balance in the universe. Hale's mind raced. He had always believed humanity had been in control of the ship, that they had built it to fight off threats. But now he understood the deeper truth. They were not the masters of the Leviathan. The Leviathan was the master, and it had been waiting for the right moment to awaken. As the energy continued to pulse, the ship began to calm. The overwhelming force that had once threatened to tear everything apart slowly began to stabilize. The Zoggoths, watching from a distance, still hesitant, saw this shift and knew they could not challenge this power. Varrock, aboard his flagship Zorthar, stood at the edge of the bridge, staring at the growing energy barrier surrounding Earth. His fleet was powerless to stop it, and he realized that the war they had come to wage was not one they could win. "We've been wrong," Varrock said quietly, turning to his officers. "This is not just a battle for a planet. This is a battle for the future of all life in the galaxy." The Zoggoths had underestimated humanity, and they had underestimated the Leviathan. They had thought their superior technology would bring them victory, but they had failed to account for the forces that lay hidden within the depths of Earth itself. Now they were faced with an undeniable truth. The power they sought was beyond their reach, and they had awakened something far greater than themselves. Back on Earth, General Hale made his final decision. He could see the writing on the wall. The Leviathan's power, if fully unleashed, could end the war. But it would come at a cost that humanity might never be able to undo. The energy in the ship had become far more than just a weapon. It had become a living force, tied to the very fabric of the galaxy. "I've seen enough," Hale said, his voice resolute. "We can't wield this power like a weapon. We have to protect it, guard it, not just for us, but for all the worlds that might need it. The Leviathan will not be our weapon. It will be our shield." The voice of the Leviathan responded, its tone now warm, almost comforting. "You have chosen wisely, General. Your people will rise above the temptation to dominate. You will learn that true strength lies not in power, but in restraint." With that, the Leviathan's power began to stabilize. The energy pulse that had been threatening to overwhelm the planet now began to dissipate, retreating back into the depths of the ship. The Zoggoth fleet, knowing they could no longer fight the force they had awakened, withdrew, leaving Earth behind. They were defeated, not by weapons or force, but by the very nature of the guardianship humanity had stumbled upon. As the Leviathan's energy settled, General Hale stood tall, looking out across the battlefield. Earth was safe, at least for now. The Zoggoths were gone, and humanity had been tested in ways they could never have imagined. But the future was still uncertain. The Leviathan was not a tool of war, but a reminder of the balance that the universe demanded. A balance that humanity had only just begun to understand. As Hale watched the horizon, a new question arose. What would humanity do with the knowledge they had gained? Would they continue to fight for survival, or would they strive to protect the delicate balance of the galaxy? The ultimate test had yet to come. But for now, Earth was safe, and humanity had earned its place in the universe. The choice was theirs to make, and they would not face it alone. The universe was vast, but for the first time, humanity had a chance to truly understand its place within it.